Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Paul Donato, Chief Research Officer of the ARF.
Out on the verge of the rest of our lives tonight, top of the world, and we're dressed.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back. Now, I don't really need these, but everybody in my demo is wearing them, so I'm going to just try to fit in here, okay? Okay, short ads. You may recall that short ads as a format really started with streaming and digital. And remember what Brad said yesterday, call to action early, brand early, because people are only there for a couple of seconds. And of course now we have short ads on linear TV. Not just linear TV, but the Super Bowl and the Olympics. This morning, Turner, Fox, talked about downsizing their ad load, and I couldn't help but wonder whether sixes might not be part of that toolkit. So I am very excited about this next paper. It's our second award-winning paper, What a Shorter Ad Can and Cannot Do. Please welcome Magda Nenycz-Thiel. Magda is Mars Professor of Marketing and Senior Research Associate at the Ehrenberg-Bass Institute, and an old friend, Duane Varan, CEO of MediaScience.
Everyone, and thank you so much for staying for this presentation. I know it's almost the end of the conference. Before I start, I would like to acknowledge our two co-authors on this project, and that's Rachel Kennedy and Steve Bellman. Without them, we will not be able to do this, so thank you to them, probably watching us from Australia at this moment. So what I would like to do, I would like to start with the audience in mind. And we talked a lot about the importance of audience here today. But I would like all of you guys now to feel like the audience we are advertising to, we are doing research for. So for a moment, let's see how does 30-second commercial feel like, or 30-second time feel like. So, you know, if we have 30 seconds, I can tell you a story in 30 seconds. I can tell you what happened yesterday. I can tell you, how my conference was, what I've done. I can waste a second, and that's OK. I can still finish my story in the next couple of seconds. It can feel extremely long when I'm brushing my teeth and I have to have a timer. But usually it's actually, quite short. But still, I have still a few seconds to finish my talk, and it's still going. Well, now it's actually the end. But let's see how or what does 6 seconds look like? How does the audience feel if they only have 6 seconds? So let's look at the first commercial. Second. And third. By the way, if you go to YouTube and you look for the best 6-second ads, that's what you get. Anyway, what I wanted to say is that all those ads are very different. Some of them have inherent value, some inherited value. The first one is an ad which is reminding us about the longer ads. But one thing that all of the ads have in common is that they are extremely short, and they feel short. And there's only 6 seconds in each of the ads. So really, what we have to really think about is how to get better in using every single second of this ad. We can't think like in 30 seconds, oh, I've got so much time, I can say something, I can tell a story, I can do this. I don't have to brand now, I can wait until the 29th seconds to brand. No, that's not what 6 seconds is like. They go in a flash. And that's why what we really need in this field is more evidence-based knowledge for the topic of what the short ads can and can't deliver to bring much better experience for our audiences, but also, again, to get much more efficient with the use of this precious time in those short ads. So what do we actually know about short ads? What do we know about ad duration? So let's start about ad duration and memory. And what we know is that longer ad exposures lead usually to better memory for the brand and the ads. And it is because we've got more time for processing. We've got more time for encoding, for storage, for retrieval, for rehearsal. So there's a lot of research in this area showing us that the longer the time, the better the ad recall. Secondly, we also know that longer ad exposure provides more time for telling a story. Of course, we know we've got more time to set up the story, to deliver the punchline, simply more time to say something rather than just in 6 seconds. And the final stream of research is talking about the relative effectiveness of the short format in comparison to the long format. And here we've got the research for 15-second ads comparing them to 30-second ads. And we know that 15-second ads deliver, that they are about 80% as effective as 30-second ads. So they are working harder per every single second they deliver. What we want to learn and what evidence-based research we are presenting here today, and Duane will be talking about the few studies we've done, we've got a few questions which we are going to cover. The first one is, how effective are 7-second ads in comparison to 15, 30, and 60 when it comes to the brand recall, ad liking, and brand attitude? And we are also looking at a set of biometrics in this question. Secondly, we are looking at age effects, and we are looking at, does this differ for older and younger viewers? And finally, we are looking at clutter, because shorter formats, yes, we can fit in more in exactly the same break, but what effect does it really have on the effectiveness of the ads?
All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the studies that were done. These studies were done as part of the Beyond 30 Seconds initiative, which is actually the longest running research agenda looking at ad formats. It's been running since 2005, over 70 studies now in that library. And this is a collaborative project between Ehrenberg-Bass and MediaScience. And we had 3 studies in the library and the pool of studies that we have. Study 46, which looked at optimal ad duration. This was looking at 15s, 30s, and 60s. These were ads for which we had 30s and 60s, and we could then make a 15 cut down, if you will. We used that same pool of ads in a following study, which was study 68, which looked at 7-second versus 15-second ads. At the time when we conceived of these studies, there were no 6-second ad units in the market. And so we went with 7s because they were half of 15s, basically. And then study 69, which looked at, again, we're going to talk a little bit about the clutter kind of problem. In these studies, we had biometrics, facial coding, and survey measures. Collectively, this is 689, which for lab-based research like this is actually a very large sample. So a relatively large body of research in this new space. Now, with unaided brand recall, the average data in this particular sample of ads was about 15% recall for the traditional 30. If we look at the 15s in this particular pool of ads, we had an average of 12%, which was actually consistent with that 80% principle that is kind of embedded in the literature, if you will. But now we can do something that we haven't been able to do in the past. We can actually grow the size of the ad. Remember, these are exactly the same ads. These are the same ads being cut basically to different lengths. And what we see is that there is actually a performance. But again, if it was twice as effective, you would have expected to see something on the order of 30% recall. You're not getting that. So you're getting something a little bit less. It's actually on the order of about 125%. And now we come to the magic question. What do we get with 7? And we had a debate internally. There were some who felt that we would get negligible results. In fact, if everything was kind of proportional, you would have seen a 3% effect. What do we get? We actually get a 9% effect. If we actually model this out in terms of the effect efficiency, what we end up with in terms of relative effectiveness is something that looks like this. So we end up with about 80% of the efficiency, consistent with the literature, for a 15, 125% efficiency for a 60, and then we land on this new magic metric now, which is 60% efficiency for a 7 in this particular case. And so that leads us to a relatively new principle. Again, it's only early research, but we're hoping to see this replicated in future work, which is that a 6-second ad delivers about 60% of the impact of a 30-second commercial. If you've got your cameras, good moment to take a picture, tweet about this principle to your friends. With the memory measure was actually where we saw the highest level of variability. Across other measures, the 7-second is delivering very similar kinds of results. So we're not seeing huge effects. Now, Magda talked about the literature around the story arc, if you will. If we look at if we equalize the units by basically breaking them into 15 intervals, so for a 15-second ad, each interval would be 1 second. For a 30, each would be 2, et cetera. So we can basically see how the patterns of the ads look over the same period of time units, if you will. What we see is that the 7-second ad is very flat. You don't really end up with a lot of latitude for a roller coaster experience moving through a lot of emotional variability. And in fact, the best story arc is not the 60, as you might expect, but it's actually the 30. And so the 30 is what's really giving you that. So what this really highlights is that the 6-second ad is not going to be doing the same thing as the 30-second ad. So really, we are talking about a portfolio of different types of ad units that are going to be delivering to different kinds of experiences. The story with age was really interesting, actually. These are my kids, by the way, so I thought a good opportunity to show you how cute my kids are. The story with age was really interesting. The theory, the hypothesis going into the study was that the 6-second ad might work with young people, but definitely wouldn't work with older people. That was kind of like what we assumed going in. What we discovered was there were no differences with the short ad units and age. They worked equally effectively for the young and the old. There was an effect on age, but it was really most pronounced for the 60-second ad. And what we found was the 60-second ad did much better with older audiences. So there is kind of like, if you will, it's harder to hold the attention of younger audiences over 60 seconds than, but there was not really the kind of short ad effect and age interaction that we had expected to see. The other thing, of course, is in our study we looked at what happens if you use the 7 as a second exposure. So if we look at a 7, so if you've seen a 30 and now you see a 7, or if you see a 30 and you see a 15, is there a difference there? It turns out there's remarkably no difference across those two experiences. So the 7 can be used as a kicker in the same kind of level that you would use a 15. So there's a lot of efficiency potentially there. But using the 30 in combination with the 7 actually has some potential benefits. So if we look at the 7-second ads on their own, or if we look at a repeat 7, or if we look at the combination of the 30 plus 7, the 7 does benefit from having the 30. In other words, having the more full story and then being reminded of it improved ad likability for the 7. Now, finally, a little bit of a word of warning. So the 6-second does work, or 7 in our particular case. It does work. It's a potentially great new model. But the temptation then, of course, is to say, well, hey, this is great. Now we can put more 7-second ads in the same break. So now why don't you just watch 20 6-second ads instead of 5 30-second ads? And so we tested those possibilities as well. We've tested those kind of ideas as well in terms of increasing the clutter. So if we look at the biometric data, it will not surprise you. Now, again, remember, the slide I'm going to show you is about the same duration of time. And what we learned in this study is that clutter is not a function of time. It's a function of the number of ad units. So you create clutter by having more ad units, even if it's within the same period in time. And so what we see is that physiological arousal goes down significantly once we start increasing the clutter, even though the period of time was exactly the same. And this actually translates to worse ad impact. So here we're looking at brand recall, and we can see that as we increase clutter into these cells, the potential impact on memory significantly diminishes. So the 6-second add unit does work, but start adding in clutter, and you really start to undo a lot of that magic. So in closing, 3 key takeaways for you today. Number 1, yes, the 6-second unit is a viable ad model, and it does deliver value. And on our data so far, we are estimating that at about 60% of the impact of the traditional 30. What it really highlights is because it is a different kind of beast, it's a new arena. And there's a need for a lot of research understanding the different kind of narrative approaches that we can take, the different creative approaches that we can take, to really understand the role, the new opportunities, and a lot of the limitations associated with these new formats. And of course, the benefits do significantly decay once you diminish once you begin starting to add in clutter. And if you have any follow-up questions, if we don't get it today, please email us. We'd love to continue the dialogue with you. So we have a few minutes for questions. Yeah. We open up the floor. Mr. Poltrak, I presume.
So this is the scenario I see right now. The advertisers take some of their 30s, convert them to 7s, right? And run them instead of 30s. We reduce the total amount of advertising on television, which people seem to want, and we don't change effectiveness at all, right?
So I don't think we can draw that conclusion out of this study.
I don't think you can either, really, seriously. Yeah, no. But it does seem to be, you know, we've been discussing over the last couple of days the idea of less commercial time and more program content, and now, the idea of just running all 6s obviously is not going to work. The clutter problem is there. But it does seem to be that if we could find a mix of 6s and 30s that's magical, we can deliver for the advertiser every bit of value that we're doing now with less commercial time.
That's right. Yeah, I think it is definitely about a portfolio, about a mix, and about a need for research to really understand exactly how those things all sync together and what the right kind of balance is to take to the approach. But the fact that it's viable, I think, is a step forward, because until this research, I mean, there's a lot of it now starting to happen. Until we had that research, it was a real unknown entity around what a 6-second ad was really doing.
Hello there, fascinating. Can you talk a little bit more about the affective response? You said that the arc was flatter, but on what particular affective measures was it the least?
So that particular slide was looking at smiling activity, which of course was the facial coding measure. There was a similarity also in the biometric data. So across both of those, when you compared the different units in time, you actually saw, particularly with it's not so much that there was a lot happening at the 15 versus the 30 versus the 60. You still have a lot of roller coasters, if you will, that are happening there.
There was nothing happening for the 7.
But not for the 7.
And this was the main pattern. That 7 was pretty much flat.
7's flat. You just don't have enough time to take people on a journey. You have enough time to take them in a moment. Horst. The brands, were they well-known brands? I don't remember. Horst, unfortunately, we don't remember exactly what brands, what the brands were that were in this study.
I think it was a mixture of well-known, smaller and bigger brands. So to answer your question, some are well-known. Yeah.
In the back.
Thank you. Eric Salama from Kantar. I think it would be interesting also to overlay the cost of buying the different formats, because I think most people listening to your presentation will assume that the cost of a 15-second is half the cost of a 30-second.
It's about 80%.
No,
so,
but so that's
yeah.
so I'm just saying that from an ROI point of view,
Yeah.
and I don't know if there are any media buyers in the room, it's worth overlaying the cost side of things
That's a good
because
point.
a 7 isn't half the cost of a 15 and a 15 isn't half the cost of a 30. So you need to factor that in as well when
Yeah,
you're looking at what
absolutely.
the most effective mix is.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, a media buyer goes into the equation understanding the cost side of it. The unknown for them is the effect side of it. So it introduces and brings
But
a
then
little
the cost
bit of.
would be the function of the effectiveness, like
That's
for
right.
the 15 and 30 seconds. So.
Ultimately, the market navigates towards. All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, guys.